talking to another of our class of 1966 Harvard-Radcliffe authors, Ellen Leopold, whose book, Under the Radar, Cancer and the Cold War, shows how nearly every aspect of our understanding and discussion of cancer bears the imprint of Cold War entanglement. In the book, you document the military, governmental, industrial, and medical views of radiation and atomic energy. This is, do you chronicle this really from the end of World War II? What was the inspiration to write this book?
Well, it follows on from an earlier book that I wrote, which was about basically the cultural, social history of breast cancer in the 20th century. And I tripped over a woman when I was doing research for that book who had been one of the first people to receive radiation as a treatment for cancer in the early 1950s. And her life had been completely turned upside down and basically ruined by it, because when cobalt radiation was introduced, it was not following a series of clinical trials in which they tried to assess its effectiveness and its dangers. The clinical trials were basically the first generation of people who underwent the therapy. So they were guinea pigs for radiotherapy that was very little was really known about. And in the case of this woman whom I just met briefly 10 or 15 years ago, she was just an ordinary housewife in Wichita, Kansas, when she underwent this treatment. And her body was basically wrecked. But instead of just disappearing, sliding away into obscurity, she decided that she was going to sue the doctors for their failure to have warned her or given her any notion of the risks that might be involved in the therapy that they recommended for her. So she took them to court, which was a completely extraordinary thing for her to have done in the mid-50s. And the court case became one of the key steps forward in the whole business about giving informed consent to treatment. Because initially she lost the first round of the case, but she won on appeal. And it was clear that she had never been warned, given any warning about what kind of damage could be done by this treatment. So anyhow, I didn't write about her in the first book, but I thought that I would return to her at some time in the future. And when I did, I realized that her story about this novel treatment that she received was really a much broader one about the way the country, the way the government, and in particular the Atomic Energy Commission, used the introduction of radiotherapy as in the medical field as a way of softening the introduction of atomic weapons, radiation fallout in the military sector. So these two things were developed in tandem, atoms for peace, atoms for war, and they both had an impact on each other. So that was how I got to this larger story through this woman, Irma Nathanson, in the 1950s. So this was the government sponsoring in the way that the government still does today, where they will invest in big pharma, but then fail to, for the most part, to hold on to the property rights that they have underwritten, because they want to encourage profitability in the drug market. So they will invest to get the thing going and make it feasible for companies to produce some advanced drugs. And then but they don't want to have government involvement in the way any of those products are marketed or monitored. So radiation was exactly the same. All of the isotopes that became the basis for radiotherapies were actually given to companies that expressed an interest in developing radiotherapies, and just given to them. And then when they developed the exact therapies that could be delivered to patients, the government backed off, didn't want to have any further involvement in the delivery of the system. And backing off meant that physicians were going to be in a position to decide for themselves without any kind of oversight from the government on how these therapies were going to be delivered, how much radiation was going to be involved in these therapies. There's nothing like the FDA for radiation therapies or for physicians or for surgery. The government does not control or vet any therapies or anything that surgeons wish to do. The government does not control. They have lots of ways of advising and giving recommendations, but they ultimately don't have the kind of power that the FDA does to curtail or monitor or rein in things which may be proved to be toxic.
Was any certain book or certain author particular inspiration for you to follow this path?
Absolutely. I would say that Rachel Carson's Silent Spring is the key document for most people working in this arena, that the notion that we could quite easily destroy ourselves by our failure to actually look at the implications of the science that we've unleashed on the American population, so-called science. Yeah, definitely. Her courage, she was phenomenally courageous, because I don't know if you know, but she died of breast cancer. And I, in my earlier book on breast cancer, I included the correspondence between her and her surgeon, a guy called Barney Kreil, while she was undergoing treatment. And she was very clear that she did not want to let the world know that she was sick, because she thought that then her criticism of chemicals and of the damage we were doing in the environment would be judged sour grapes, because they had made her ill herself. So she didn't want to compromise the integrity of her science by bringing her own story into the picture. She's quite an extraordinary person. The book is really a history, but at the end, I make a plea for the idea that we might have something called a radiation audit, which is to say that because no one controls our consumption of radiation through our lifetime, it might now be a good idea, and because it is a known carcinogen, radiation, it might be a good idea for us to think about the cumulative effect of our exposures to radiation, in addition to what is in the atmosphere that we can't avoid. So I wrote a kind of plea at the end to think about doing this.